Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri. I work as a talent advisor to organizations, and I also love to bring ideas about talent and technology to you through these guests of mine who are there on the podcast. And today I have with me George Anders. George Anders is an author, he's a journalist, and he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist at that. More of that in a minute. But he also works as a writing coach, and he's written some books which I have found to be extremely useful even today. There are very few books which have a timeless quality. So George's books have that timeless quality. I will tell you in a minute. The very first one that I first read was The Rare Find. It was a book that really uh, gave me an idea that how well somebody could talk about talent and what makes it possible for somebody to be exceptional in the way that they are. In some ways, that really led me to, spend more time understanding what George does to how does he approach his craft. And then I also read his other book, which I have reviewed on my site, which was called You Can Do Anything: The Surprising Value of a Useless Liberal Education. I found that title really amazing, but it was a lovely book. Again, something that I recommend. He's come up with a new book, which is what we'll talk about today, and it's called Finding the Story. Is that correct? Did I get
Yes,
this
that
right?
is. Yes. And
All
this one
right.
is, yeah. Mhm.
George, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here. I'm so honored that you chose to spend time with us. Um, Thank you very much.
It's always good to see you. Our acquaintanceship goes back to one of your early books, Don't Hire the Best, which was once again a cheeky title with some very thoughtful ideas inside. And it's a treat to keep up with your work as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I must also say that besides, of course, winning the Pulitzer Prize for his work as a features writer for Wall Street Journal, George also started the LinkedIn newsletter, which is it's called the Workforce Insights. Is that the one?
Yes, that is. And that was a database newsletter that provided a lot of insights about where the labor market trends were going and what decisions individual members could make in terms of what degrees they pursued, where they lived, what kinds of jobs they aspired to. So we aim to provide coaching at scale.
Absolutely. So, do you want to start with your latest book first or the older books first? Where should we start?
We can go in either direction, but let's start with the present day, and then we can do some archaeology later on and go farther
Okay, all
from there.
right.
So,
Storytelling is one of the six most useful skills that I talked about in my last book, Career 3.0, and where I really talk about finding six skills, one of which was become a great storyteller. But not everyone is a great storyteller. So let's start with the basic differences. A whole lot of people narrate anecdotes. They tell, this is what happened at work. Why is that not interesting?
so an anecdote is only valuable if it has a purpose. If you're trying to illuminate something, anecdotes can be inspirational, they can be cautionary, they can be informative. There's a multitude, and they can be inspiring. That's an extra zone that deserves attention. But before you embroider a story with all of the details, and they can become sort of overwhelming, almost like a 30-pound blanket that one's wearing, figure out why you're telling it. What do you want people to know? What kind of feeling are you trying to create? And there's a famous saying in US politics that people absorb statistics, but they change their minds because of stories. And that example of someone who's living a bold, brave life can be very inspirational. One of my favorite projects at LinkedIn was a story about US military veterans and the struggles they have trying to get recognized for their skills. And I told it through the eyes of a former Army radio technician who had come out of the military feeling he was in great shape, could not get any respect from the civilian market. Some of the habits he'd learned in the military, that sense of respect, that sense of showing up early, of sort of being serious and buttoned down, didn't play well in the labor market. Eventually, he straightened things out. 10 years later, he had an excellent career. And I portrayed him as a very sympathetic person, the kind of person where you look at him and you go, Sergeant Thomas deserves a better break in life. And I wanted readers to feel that they were invested in his success, that they liked him, they believed in him, they saw a little bit of themselves in them. And that ability to draw the reader into the story or the listener and have them emotionally care about the central character. If I were to offer one pointer, that would be it. Bring the reader along on your journey, get them invested in your story.
You talked about something which also actually aligns with another piece of work that I'm doing with a group that works with veterans. It's called Bharat Veterans, and they're finding the exact same problem with veterans because potential employers only think of them in limited ways. That okay, they can, manage security, but what else could they possibly do? And that is such a limiting view. How do you think, we should tell that story better?
So one of the important things is to get an ambassador or an envoy into that organization. And I found that the places who have already hired some veterans are very appreciative of what veterans can do, and the walls have come down. So among the skills are logistics. And I remember talking to someone who had been a tank commander, and he was being offered, night watchman jobs. And he was going, what do I do as a tank commander? I know how to get the rest of the people going forward. I know how to take care of supplies. My tanks do not run out of fuel. There's an awful lot that I can do to help things run on time and under budget. And, I will keep writing that message. I think the more it enters popular culture, that matters too. But I think just that ability to have met someone who is living that trend, that can be transformative.
Your new book, what is it about? Finding the story. Tell me more about that.
So this is an effort to unpack what's been a very hopscotch kind of career on my own part. I started as an economics major at Stanford University. I thought I was going to go to business school and do something in finance. I was going to get journalism out of my system and just do it for a year or two, and then I would go get a real job. And 40 some years later, I'm still writing. I'm still in journalism. I turned down my chance to go to the fancy business schools. And in some situations, they're just entertaining stories. I mean, I have the distinction, for what it's worth, of having both sat in the royal box at a British polo match watching then Prince Charles, now King Charles, play polo. It was amusing to see that he had four Argentines helping him on his team, and their job was to get the ball out of the corners and pass it to him, and then he would tap it into the goal. And it was just this wonderful example of the British class system. So that's the high end of my work. I have also ended up working as a foot messenger and getting screamed at people by people for showing up late and being, demeaned and insulted. And of course, my experience is, yes, as a human being, I'm a little annoyed at this, but as a guy trying to collect the story, the notion of being insulted by Al Goldstein, the founder of Screw magazine, and without offending your listeners, I will say that Screw magazine was not a hardware publication. It addressed a different sort of topic. But anyway, I go seeking adventure. I find it in a lot of places. And over time, I think that's what drives the book, is the sense that I go from a curiosity seeker to a meaning seeker, and how you can find meaning, how you can use your writing for good, how you can inspire people. So there's an evolution in the book from a curious, rambunctious young man getting in trouble to a somewhat wiser, certainly older person trying to help other people live their best lives.
When you think about a story, and I was sort of, when I read your LinkedIn posts, and by the way, those of you who don't do it already, I would really tell them that you should follow George because he writes some really beautiful insights. His newsletter has so many lovely insights, and he actually talks about how do you find the story and sort of, what is that lens. So talk to me a little bit about that. What is a story? How do you know it is this much that will make the story and not the rest of it? And how do you trim out what is not a story?
So I've always been a believer in the healing power of rewrite, that your first version will have some of what you want and some discards. Among the things that help are reading it out loud. I think that's a great way to discover phrases that fall flat. Workshopping it with other people. And in fact, when I worked at the Wall Street Journal, one of the rules was, after you've been on a reporting trip, pay attention to how you explain what you learned to your spouse or your roommate or someone else. And you're going to strip away all the jargon. You're not going to try and sound cerebral. You're just going to say what was interesting. And I think that classic test of how would I tell it to my spouse, my kid, is an excellent way to stay on track.
That is a great way to avoid the curse of expertise, as they say, that where, you believe that just because you know all the, the jargon, the short forms, and all of that, everybody understands that. I was talking to a doctor yesterday and trying to explain that, one of my friends was the chief marketing officer at PepsiCo in Mexico, and I said that, oh, she went for the CMO's job. And he said, why would this person be a chief medical officer? So it just struck me that the same abbreviation, depending on the context, can mean completely different things. So great view on that.
I,
Um,
we're going to stay on medicine for a moment. One of our friends some years ago was in a medical residency program on the edge of Silicon Valley, and she kept hearing these reference to VCs, which you and I know as venture capitalists. She thought of them as virtual colonoscopies and was wondering why there was so much excitement about it. Yes, everyone has their own jargon. One of the things I've found, though, is that often the very brightest people in the field are the best explainers, and they make it simple. I had the privilege at LinkedIn of hearing a talk by Andrea Getz, who is a Nobel laureate in physics and has done extraordinary work in astronomy, including all of the complexities of worlds with 11 different dimensions. She took me farther in her talk than I've ever gone about the intricacies of cosmology. And she just made it seem simple and clear and logical. And usually I stall out about 2 paragraphs in, but there's that ability of the people who understand the field best to make it clear and make it simple.
where do you draw the line between writing for in a manner which is simple and easy to understand versus, let's say, dumbing it down? What's the difference?
So there's a trick that Tim O'Reilly taught me. He, of course, published all of the O'Reilly guides to software and the like. And he really had 2 pointers. One was if you're introducing a new concept, give it a whole paragraph. Explain the concept simply and clearly. And the more complicated it is, the shorter your sentences should get. You can do a 40-word sentence about walking through a meadow and admiring the animals and the grass whispering and what have you. If you're trying to explain quantum mechanics, get your sentences down to about 10 or 12 words. It just makes it easier for people to understand. So, yeah, I think the dread of dumbing it down is you never get to the meat of the subject. But you can get there, just get there more slowly, keep the words simple. But I wouldn't be frightened of technical things. One of the things we also did in the newspaper business was to provide the overview first and then the jargon later. If people know directionally where you're going, they will get the idea. They will be ready to travel with you. You don't have to get the jargon into the first paragraph.
When you think about, you know, the difference between what is interesting, but maybe to you, but not to the reader, how do you make that judgment?
So one of the things I found, I had a couple of years where I was very active on the public speaking circuit, and I had a lot of talks that were tied to the theme of my book. And I discovered that the effectiveness of the talk was 30% the content that I was bringing, and 70% my understanding of where the audience was. So I had one very successful one going to a British high-end engineering company that was in the midst of a leadership transition. And I had just completed a story about Hewlett Packard's efforts to restructure itself. And I took that as a case study and took it apart for them of what the new leaders brought in, what they were careful not to do, how much change the organization could absorb. And in a situation like that, meeting your audience where they are is crucial. I'm actually doing some writing coaching for a small newspaper just to see if I can share some best practices. And there again, my advice to the reporter is understand your community, understand what's important. And once you have that empathy, people will come with you a long way. But if you're too caught up in your own credentials, and the old saying is, people need to know how much that you care before they care how much you know. And it still holds true.
When you look at your role as a writing coach, what is it that you do as a writing coach? I mean, do you write on their behalf, or do you teach them how to write, or do you do both? Or tell me more about that.
One of the things that I learned as a parent of teenagers, and that is a very humbling stage in life. That is a time to learn that you're going to need a new set of skills to work. But one of the things I learned there was I was much more effective when I asked questions than when I provided answers. So I'll give you an example that speaks to writing. I'm working a little bit with someone at a reading group who's recounting a life-changing trip to Europe that she took after graduating from university. And we're getting a lot of detail about, which museums she went to. And I'm going, I don't yet know why you're taking the trip. And this will be a much more important and interesting story if we have a sense of who you were when you started and how the trip changed you. And she goes, oh, I had just broken up with my boyfriend who I thought was going to marry me. And right at graduation, when I expected to get a ring, he just said goodbye. And I go, that's your driver. You are a person who feels snubbed. You're embarking on this trip to find yourself. And you don't exactly have to write Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert, but you have a story that's parallel. And we will root for you on your journey as you make new friends and rebuild your identity. But the story is not about what you can see at the Hans Holbein Museum. The story is about why you have traveled 6,000 miles to rediscover yourself. So, that's a simple example of coaching someone to come to terms with the emotional driver of their story instead of piling on details without getting to the deeper truth of what it is they want to tell.
So when you wrote The Rare Find, what was your process of writing that book?
So I wanted to meet the 10 or 12 most exceptional talent spotters in America. 10 or 12 is an arbitrary number, but I figured this would be a ground up research project rather than a top down. Top down, you start with a thesis and just look for examples that match. Ground up, you gather all of the low level anecdotal data or the narrow gauge statistical and then build up. So the catch is it takes much longer to do it. Top down, you can go start to finish on a book in 6 months. Bottom up, it's probably 2 or 3 years of work. I was fortunate that my editor believed in me. He funded me at a level where I could keep doing this and still be able to buy groceries. So I went into some very interesting organizations. I went into Army Special Forces and saw how they selected the best soldiers they could for rare roles. I went into Teach for America, which of course is a well-known initiative where college students with ambitions to help in education go into very challenging schools. And I was struck not so by the fact that they weren't just looking at grade point average and professed devotion to teaching. That was interesting, but that wasn't necessarily the decider. The tool they used to identify the people who were probably going to be really good teachers from those who wouldn't was to have them teach a sample lesson of about 5 minutes and then to impersonate a little child who was distracted and losing focus. And one of the evaluators would raise her hand and sort of wobble her hand about and ask a question that had nothing to do. And you could see the difference between the teachers who would identify this as a child who wasn't keeping up, reassure her that, if she just waited, it would all become clear, versus the ones who would get their lesson hijacked by going off on this tangent, and 10 minutes later, they would still be trying to get the class back. So I like that ability of doing simulations, doing auditions, seeing work samples in practice. And I think I've had this experience myself as a manager. I have hired people whose greatest skill was to give a job interview. And about 3 weeks later, you start to realize, they talked a great game, but they're not delivering. And the chance to see what people actually do in a work-like setting, I think is invaluable.
That's so similar to what I also learned when I wrote "Don't Hire the Best," and that was also a slightly different lens. My thesis was that skills are easy to learn, and today we see that artificial intelligence is learning your skills, but it's the personality of the person that actually determines whether the person is going to be successful. Because at the end of the day, think about it, the job description of the CEO is same across most companies. I would say, at least with matching sizes and same sectors, certainly so. But why do we not have the ability to transplant one CEO from this company and put them into another? And the reason is the personality and the culture and the role, all of that actually must gel together. So, which is what you also sort of talked about in your unique way. There were great examples, and I absolutely recommend that. It's such a fabulous book, not just for HR professionals who are in this whole business of hiring, but anyone, because we all make hiring decisions, isn't it? You hire a writing coach, or you hire, even a friend, choosing a friend. There's a people decision involved in that. Um, we are talking to George Anders, one of my favorite columnists and writers, and he's written this new book called What? Finding Your Story.
Finding the story. Yes, indeed.
Finding the Story. And I've read two of his books, which I absolutely loved. The second book that I am going to talk to you about is, you wrote this book called The Jagged Resume. And it's something that phrase has stayed with me, the jagged resume. Explain to somebody who's not familiar with your work, what is a jagged resume and why should we care about it?
So this is a way of looking at people who have tried different careers and have perhaps had a stumble somewhere along the way or a redirection. And often that is incredibly motivating. I found that people who are trying to prove something, who feel that they deserve a bounce back in life, will work incredibly hard, will metaphorically burst through walls to do it. I also find a lot of people who didn't have a life plan at age 18 or 20 can end up with a very clear grip of where they want to go at 25. And I think one of the problems of credentialism carried too far is that you end up with very fragile people. They've never encountered a failure or a setback. And the result is when something doesn't go their way, they fall apart. They don't know what to do. In fact, in the new book, one of the stories I tell is my first book contract, which was with Simon and Schuster, which is a very august house, and one of their most famous editors who had edited Woodward and Bernstein when they wrote their book about the downfall of the
Wow.
Nixon presidency. So it was a great honor to be working for her. What I didn't realize is that her feeling was, I've given you an advance. I'm expecting you to solve your own problems. I do not have time to coach you through the process. So the whole contract unraveled, and I had to get a different editor and ultimately found someone who was much more capable of providing the gentle guidance and encouragement that I needed. But the reason I share that story is ever since, one, that has made me a much better manager. I have a lot more respect for people who stumbled somewhere and are working hard to make sure it never happens again and who are bringing a redefined energy. I'm more patient with people. I think sometimes managers, because they are strong in a field, tend to be a little too stern, a little too quick, and you end up with employees who are cowed or their main concern is just, I don't want to get fired, I don't want to upset the boss. And then you lose originality. And I'll turn this around the other way. When I was at LinkedIn, one of my roles informally was to be the possibilities person. And we had a lot of relatively new hires in their late 20s, early 30s. They were bursting with ideas. They were new to the culture. They knew this was a multi-billion-dollar organization. And they were a little apprehensive of, wow, do I even dare propose this? And my role was to say, yes, you've got a great idea. Pitch it with enthusiasm. This company is looking for fresh ideas. It needs growth. You have the ability to bring growth. And I would get notes back from them years later saying, thank you so much for giving me permission to excel, giving me permission to try something new. So yes, I think that's a huge part of management. It's often not talked about. I mean, there's a lot of very, top-down, process-oriented management, but being able to inspire your people just takes everything to a whole new level.
I mean, I always believe that is the difference between an average manager who can, allocate the work and get the work back and say,
Mhm.
this gets an A plus, this gets a B. It's a bit like the teacher, so when you have teachers who change your life, it is always the teacher who kind of makes you believe that you can do something which you personally are convinced you could never, never, never do. And,
Exactly.
so I've just been very privileged to have people like that in my life, as teachers, managers, colleagues, and that's made all the difference. So how do you become one of these people?
I think you can model it. I was lucky to have worked for some really excellent managers. Early in my career as a reporter, Norm Pearlstein was the national news editor of the Wall Street Journal. He went on to be the head of Time Inc. and all kinds of other things. But Norm really believed in lifting people up. We would get together for breakfast about once every 2 months, just one-on-one. And I still remember some of his pointers. One of them was that public speaking will probably be important to you down the road. Early on, take an invitation from anyone you get, even if it's unpaid, even if it involves talking to 15 people at the Maplewood Library. You will be glad you did. And he was absolutely right. I mean, I started out as a quite withdrawn, shy child. I found the world a little overwhelming. And this is something you can learn. You can get more comfortable. And that ended up being valuable. So I think the right sort of mentors can help you a great deal. I worked at Fast Company magazine, and Alan Weber, one of the founding editors, had a maxim of hire for attitude, train for skill. That kind of circles back to a point earlier in our conversation, but it's so true. I mean, I remember picking up someone who had just graduated from college. Her writing experience was thin, but what I saw was good. And she just had curiosity and a high level of rapport with people. And I thought, Allison could probably end up being pretty good. And she ended up becoming editor-in-chief of ESPN, the magazine, some years later.
Ooh,
So yeah, that ability to spot talent early is very exciting and very gratifying.
it's one of the toughest skills to build, I think. I've done this for years. I still think that, it's so hard. Um, if you were to sort of really advise people on improving their craft, I'm not talking about somebody who is just discovering the joy of writing, but if it was a choice between reading, writing, and just this whole aspect of speaking in public to sharpen your thinking, etc. As a writer, which one works best
I
to
think
build your craft?
all three have great value, but I would emphasize reading works that are well done by people. You can pick up a lot of habits. You can learn things about telling. I remember early in the journal, I was told good writers will write down different things in their notebook than not so good ones. And I go, well, how is that possible? You're just taking a transcript of what people are saying. But even as we do this podcast, I see you've got all these pictures of horses, and horses must be important to you. And if we were going in a different direction, I would want to know that. And I think an openness to what else people are saying, what they aren't saying, what they tell you twice. Why are they telling me it twice? What do they never tell me? And the sense of big ears, knowing how to pick things up, really valuable.
That's the horse's ears that you are referring to, big ears like
Yes,
that.
both literally and metaphorically.
I want to take up a slightly different direction and so ask you about your habits of writing. What are the habits you've sort of made sure you cultivate and bring it into your system to become better in your craft? What is it?
So I have a lot of habits which other people may think are eccentric, but I like them. And I'm going to go through and hopefully there's some instructive value and there certainly will be some entertainment value. The first thing is that I write in Word, which is standard, but I do my outlining in Excel. My thinking is when it comes time to organize, you want to think like an engineer rather than a writer. So I build something approaching a classic engineering Gantt chart with ribbons that represent each chapter and what needs to be done. The reason I do this is because I think to build a good outline, it needs to be robust and it also needs to be malleable. And I find if you do written outlines, pretty soon you create wonderful phrases linking ideas that shouldn't be linked, and then it's very hard to let go. And my engineering outline is very modular, so I found I write books faster that way. And when I need to do that revision where I go, you know what, chapter 5 needs to be split into two chapters, and one of them goes early and the other goes late, I can do that in Excel in about 5 minutes. When I'm trying to tear apart a written outline, it can take hours and I can lose focus. So that would be habit number one. Habit number two, write somewhere where there is daylight and a view. My first book I did looking out on a brick wall. Took me 3 years. My next book I did looking out on a garden. It took me 11 months. There were some other factors that changed too, but the one that was very much in my control is, am I somewhere where I feel calm and relaxed and I'm enjoying the process? Next one is to build a circle of advisors as I write something substantial, and I fit them into three categories. There are people who are skilled writers who can help me on the cadence and pacing of what I'm doing. There are people who are technical experts. So, for example, when I did The Rare Find, I was talking a lot with people who worked in HR and had perspectives there. When I did You Can Do Anything, I talked to career counselors. And then the third category is just people who give me a hug. And this can be quite literal if it's my spouse, but people who just keep me cheered up. And we write better when we're happy, or when we're feeling, optimistic about the world. So select your advisors for which of these three things you need. Other habits of note. Um, Lately, I've done most of my writing in coffee shops. And that's partly because when I launched into the new book, Finding the Story, it's very conversational. It's as if I'm talking to the reader. And I found that sitting alone in a writing room, my writing gets stiffer. And I've published in Harvard Business Review. I can sound like a professor to some degree if I need to. That was not the tone I wanted. I wanted it to feel as if you were having a conversation with me. So, in fact, having an orderly streak, I have a spreadsheet of the 36 best cafes in the San Francisco Bay Area to write in, or more correctly, a ranking. There are 10 of them that are really good. There are another 30 that I would use for niche roles. There's one where I would go to reorganize. There was another I would use for document work. And then there are probably 3 or 4 that I will never go back to again. But pick your setting. And the Ray Bradbury, the novelist, picked the strangest setting of all, but it worked for him. He had no money at the time. This was in the age of typewriters. He would go to the basement of the UCLA library and write at a coin-operated typewriter where you had to put in a dime for another 30 minutes of writing. So that if you only have so many dimes in your pocket, that really pushes you to write fast. So everyone's different, but my preference, especially now, is to write in settings that are sociable, that are energizing. Coffee shops tend to have pretty good but not aggressive music, and that would just keep me in an easy conversational flow. So those are some of my quirks. I have more, but let me stop there and see if there's any particular area you want to probe.
This is fascinating, because I also sometimes use a background sound of a coffee shop, which has got a little bit of the murmur and the sound of the coffee machine and all of that. And if I have coffee brewing, I know that I will write well, because I can smell the coffee and that energizes me. So that's my little
You don't
piece.
even have to drink it. You're absolutely right. The scent of coffee gets you
The scent
80%
of
of the way
coffee
there.
is does something to me, definitely. Do you write more in the morning? Do you write more at night, or does it change based on the kind of writing you are doing? Serious writing, uh, a newsletter, a book. Does it matter?
So each period has its own value. I find morning is the best time to do reworking of sections. If there's one where I go, there's a better way to tell it. I'm most likely to see that in the morning. The afternoon tends to be better for, version 1.0 drafts. I used to be able to write to midnight and beyond, and sadly, that's pretty much disappeared. By 10 o'clock at night, I'm ready to sleep. Never write at 3 o'clock in the morning. I've tried that. What you produce at that time is it's an embarrassment. At a certain point, head off to sleep, and that's it. One more quirk, when I'm on sort of the third or fourth level touch up, I've done most of the rewriting. I just want to see if I'm getting the words exactly right. I tend to do that on my phone. And the reason is I'm seeing a smaller number of words, so I'm much more attentive to individual sentences. It's also a bit of a pain to do any rewriting on the phone. I mean, you're working with this, touch keyboard, and the screen is tiny. So it forces me to make changes only when I really feel I'm making them better. Because one of the saddest things as a writer is when you take a pretty good piece of writing that's an A minus, say, and you get to work on making so many changes that by the time you're done, you've turned it into a C plus section. And by limiting myself to the number of keystrokes I can make on the phone, I'll do the simple things. If I've used the same word twice within an adjoining 30-word section, I'll switch one to a synonym. But I resist the temptation to sort of tear down the curtains and tear out the rug and remodel the entire room.
George, thank you so very much for your tips, writing tips. I personally am going to try out a couple of them. This whole business of doing your outline in Excel and writing in Word is such a intuitively logical thing to do. I mean, I don't know why everybody doesn't do it, and more importantly, why I haven't thought about it. That's certainly the biggest takeaway for me. I loved it, and of course, this whole idea of editing the final version on your phone is also insightful, because it sort of really means that you are really being very selective, and you're not trimming and polishing, just doing that little touch up. That's truly incredible. All the very best for your book, and I am sure we'll get a chance to invite you back and talk about some more stuff about your writing. It's been incredibly fun to do this with you. Thank you so much once again.
It's a pleasure. Glad we could do it.